Picture this. A 19-year-old boy stands at the edge of a harbor, clutching a worn envelope as the morning fog rolls across the water. Behind him, his mother's final words still echo in the cold air. Ahead of him, a ship that promises fortune in a foreign land. He swears an oath that will haunt him for 40 years. An oath that will cost him everything he thought mattered, only to give him something far more valuable than gold. Before we dive into this incredible journey, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. And stick around because what happens at the end of this story will leave you speechless. This isn't just another immigrant tale of triumph and tragedy. This is the story of Akira Tanaka, a young man whose promise to his dying mother became both his greatest burden and his ultimate salvation. It's about a 2-year dream that stretched into 4 decades of suffering, discrimination, and loss, but also about the moment when everything he thought he knew about success, wealth, and honor was turned completely upside down. What Akira discovered after 40 years wasn't just a lesson about money. It was a revelation that would challenge everything we think we know about what it means to keep a promise, what it means to succeed, and what it means to truly come home. In the spring of 1925, in a small fishing village outside Osaka, Akira Tanaka knelt beside his mother's futon as tuberculosis slowly stole her breath. She was 42 years old but looked 70, worn down by years of poverty after his father's death at sea. With trembling hands, she pressed an envelope into his palm. Inside, every yen she had saved over 15 years, cleaning fish at the market before dawn, mending nets until her fingers bled. "My son," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of rain on the roof. "Japan is drowning in hardship. You are young. You are brilliant. Take this money and go to America. Build a life. Return in 2 years with enough wealth to honor your father's memory and save our family name. Promise me you will not waste your life in this village, dying poor like me." Akira, tears streaming down his face, gripped her hand and made the oath that would define his existence. "I promise, mother. 2 years. I will return rich enough to build you a house worthy of an empress." 3 weeks later, she was gone. 6 weeks after that, Akira stood on that harbor with a single suitcase, his mother's savings converted to American dollars, $87 total. And that letter, which he had read so many times the paper was soft as cloth. He was not just any young man. Despite growing up in poverty, Akira had taught himself English from discarded newspapers, had studied mathematics by candlelight, and possessed a gift for understanding people that transcended language and culture. His teachers had called him exceptional. His neighbors had called him arrogant for dreaming above his station. But Akira knew something they didn't. He understood that true intelligence wasn't just about books. It was about reading rooms, reading hearts, reading the invisible currents that move between human beings. This quality, this profound empathy combined with razor-sharp intelligence, would be both his greatest weapon and his deepest source of pain in the decades to come. The ship journey to San Francisco took 31 days. Akira spent every moment learning, helping in the kitchen to understand American food, listening to conversations to perfect his accent, observing the wealthy passengers to understand the codes of success. When he finally arrived at Angel Island, passing through immigration with his meager belongings and ambitious dreams, he had no idea that the promise he'd made was about to collide with a reality far more brutal than anything his small village had prepared him for. His first antagonist appeared within an hour of setting foot in America. The immigration inspector, a thick-necked man named Morrison with a gray mustache and eyes like chips of flint, looked at Akira's papers with unconcealed disgust. "Another one," Morrison muttered to his colleague, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "These Japanese keep pouring in, taking jobs, refusing to integrate. Look at this one. Probably can't even speak English, claiming he's here for business opportunities." Morrison's voice dripped with contempt as he mimicked Akira's stated purpose. The other inspector laughed, a cruel sound that echoed off the bare walls. Morrison leaned forward, his breath smelling of tobacco and contempt. "Listen here, boy. I don't care what dreams you've got in that oriental head of yours. This country doesn't need more of your kind. We've got quotas for a reason. You're going to take whatever work you can get, probably picking fruit, washing dishes, and you're going to be grateful for it. Rich? In 2 years?" He laughed, a bark of derision. "The only thing you'll be rich in is disappointment." The other officials joined in the mockery. A younger inspector named Peters chimed in, his voice nasal and superior. "They all come here thinking the streets are paved with gold. Can't wait to see this one in 6 months, scrubbing toilets and sending pennies back home. The laughter spread through the processing room. Even some of the other immigrants, desperate to differentiate themselves from the newest arrival, remained silent or nodded along with the officials casual. Racism. Akira felt the heat of humiliation rise in his chest, felt the instinct to argue, to defend himself. But then he remembered something his mother had told him. The bamboo that bends in the wind survives the storm that breaks the rigid oak. So instead of responding with anger, Akira simply bowed, a gesture so graceful and dignified that it momentarily silenced the room, and said in perfect, unaccented English, "Thank you for your concern, sir. I appreciate your honesty about the challenges ahead. I will remember your words." The response was so unexpected, so measured and articulate, that Morrison's face flushed red with embarrassment at having his assumptions so quietly dismantled. But the mockery was just beginning. Over the next 18 months, Akira encountered a gauntlet of prejudice that would have broken most young men. He found work at a cannery where the foreman, a man named Dutch Callahan, paid Japanese workers half what he paid white workers for the same backbreaking labor. When Akira quietly pointed out this discrepancy, suggesting he could improve efficiency if properly compensated, Dutch laughed in his face. "Improve efficiency? You people are lucky I hire you at all. There's a line of men outside who'd take your job for even less. You don't like it? There's the door." Akira stayed because he had no choice. But he began to see a pattern. A system designed to ensure people like him could never rise, never accumulate, never fulfill promises to dying mothers. His second major antagonist emerged when Akira tried to rent a room in a decent neighborhood, hoping to save money by living closer to work. The landlady, Mrs. Whitmore, a thin woman with pursed lips and a pearl necklace she wore like armor, took one look at him and said, "We don't rent to Orientals. It's nothing personal. It's about property values." The other tenants would complain. "I'm sure you understand." When Akira politely asked if there were any neighborhoods where he might find housing, she had laughed, not unkindly but with the casual dismissiveness of someone explaining reality to a child. "There are places for your people. Chinatown, Japantown. Why would you want to live here anyway? You'd be more comfortable with your own kind." The assumption that he belonged in an ethnic enclave, that comfort came only from segregation, stung more than open hostility. It was prejudice wrapped in the language of concern, and therefore harder to combat. For 2 years, Akira worked grueling hours, saved every penny, endured every insult. He learned the cannery business from the inside, understanding logistics and supply chains that his bosses didn't even realize existed. He taught himself accounting by studying discarded ledgers, business principles from library books he read at midnight. As the 2-year deadline approached, he had saved $230, more than he'd started with, but nowhere near enough to return home rich as he'd promised. The weight of that broken promise crushed him. He wrote letters to his village that he never sent, drafts full of excuses and apologies. In the end, shame kept him in America. Shame and a stubborn belief that if he just worked harder, longer, smarter, he could still fulfill his oath. Then came 1929, and the world collapsed. The Great Depression didn't just destroy fortunes, it destroyed the already threadbare lives of immigrant workers. The cannery closed. Jobs vanished. Anti-immigrant sentiment, always simmering, boiled over into violence. Akira found himself living in a shantytown. His savings depleted, working odd jobs for food. The men around him gave up, turned to drink, or bought tickets back to Japan to face failure. But Akira held on, driven by that promise, even as years turned into a decade. In 1935, something remarkable happened. Akira met a Japanese-American businessman named George Takahashi, who owned a small import company. George saw in Akira what others had missed, not just intelligence, but wisdom, the kind earned through suffering. George hired him, and slowly, painfully, Akira began to rebuild. He learned the import business, made connections, started to save again. By 1940, he had finally accumulated $3,000. Enough, he thought, to return home with his head high. 15 years late, but finally able to fulfill his promise. Then came December 7, 1941, and everything shattered again. When Pearl Harbor was attacked, the world Akira had spent 16 years building evaporated overnight. Within weeks, Executive Order 9066 was signed. Japanese Americans, regardless of citizenship, were ordered to internment camps. Akira, along with 120,000 others, was given 10 days to sell everything he owned. His savings, his dignity, his dreams, All were confiscated or sold for pennies on the dollar. He was sent to Manzanar in the California desert, surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers, stripped of everything except the clothes on his back and that letter from his mother, now 20 years old and barely legible. In the camp, Akira faced his third and most insidious antagonist, despair itself, embodied in the broken spirits around him. Men who had been doctors, lawyers, business owners now stood in line for tasteless food in a mess hall, living in tar paper barracks, watching dust storms turn day into night. Many lost their will entirely. But Akira, even here, refused to surrender to bitterness. He started teaching English classes to the children, mathematics to teenagers, business principles to adults who dared to dream of life after the camps. When younger men raged against the injustice, demanding to know why Akira could remain so calm, so dignified in the face of such systematic cruelty, he would quietly say, "Anger is the fire that consumes the vessel that holds it. We must be bamboo, not oak." The silence when he said this was deafening. Even the most militant critics found themselves unable to dismiss his words, spoken not with condescension but with the quiet authority of someone who had truly suffered and somehow not been destroyed by it. His teaching became legendary in the camp. A young man named Tommy, full of rage at the system, once confronted Akira in front of the whole class. "How can you just accept this?" Tommy shouted, gesturing at the barbed wire visible through the window. "They took everything from us. They treat us like criminals. And you're teaching us math like we're in some normal school?" The no. Tension in the room was palpable. Every eye turned to Akira, waiting to see if the old man's composure would finally crack. Akira was silent for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable. Then he spoke, his voice soft but clear enough that everyone strained to hear. "Tommy, may I ask you something? What did they take from you?" Tommy sputtered, "Everything. My family's farm, our money, our freedom." Akira held up a gentle hand. "Your family's farm. Could they take the knowledge of how to farm? Your money. Could they take your ability to earn? Your freedom to move? Could they take your freedom to think, to learn, to grow?" Tommy's face was confused now, the anger faltering. Akira continued, "I have been in America for 18 years. I have been cheated, mocked, discriminated against, and now imprisoned. But here is what I have learned, and what I hope to teach you. They can take your possessions, but they cannot take your character. They can imprison your body, but they cannot imprison your mind unless you let them. The man who can maintain dignity in a prison camp has more true wealth than the one who loses his humanity in a palace." The room was completely silent. Even Tommy, still angry but now thoughtful, sat down slowly. One of the older women in the class, Mrs. Nakamura, who had lost everything including her husband to a heart attack in the camp, spoke up quietly. "Tanaka-san, how do you do it? How do you not hate them?" And here Akira revealed a depth that stunned everyone present. "Because hate is a luxury I cannot afford. Every moment I spend hating is a moment stolen from learning, from growing, from preparing for when these gates open again. And they will open. When they do, the question will be, who will we be? The same angry, broken people who entered? Or people who became stronger precisely because we refused to let suffering make us bitter?" The transformation in that room was visible. People who had been slouching sat up straighter. Eyes that had been dull began to show something. Not quite hope, but something harder and more valuable. Determination. Akira spent 3 years in Manzanar, and by the time the camps finally closed in 1945, he was 59 years old. 20 years had passed since his mother's death. 20 years since his promise. He had nothing. No savings, no possessions, only the clothes provided by the camp and that letter, now so worn it was held together with careful folding. He returned to San Francisco to find that the import business was gone. George Takahashi had died in the camp, and the world had moved on. For the first time, Akira considered simply dying. What was the point of continuing this charade of survival? But something unexpected happened. The young people from the camp, those students he had taught, began finding him. They brought him food, helped him find a room, got him work. Tommy, the angry young man who had challenged him, was now a veteran with a new perspective. "Sensei," Tommy said. He had started calling Akira teacher near the end of their time in Manzanar. "You saved us in there, you kept us human, now it's our turn to help you." And slowly, with their help, Akira rebuilt again. Not into a wealthy man, but into something else. A pillar of the Japanese-American community. a counselor, a teacher, a man people came to when they needed wisdom. The years passed. 1950, 1960, 1970. Akira married late in life, a widow named Sachiko, who understood loss. They had no children, but they had purpose, helping new immigrants, teaching, counseling. Akira became known in San Francisco's Japantown, not as a successful businessman, but as someone far more valuable. A man of profound wisdom, someone who had suffered everything and emerged with his compassion intact. People would travel from across the state to ask his advice. Young Japanese Americans struggling with identity, older immigrants wrestling with regret. Everyone found in Akira something they couldn't quite name, a kind of wealth that had nothing to do with money. In 1983, Sachiko died. Akira was 77 years old and alone again. And suddenly, with a clarity that comes only at the end of life, he realized he needed to return to Japan. Not because he had fulfilled his promise, he never would, not in the way he'd imagined, but because there was something he needed to do, a circle he needed to close. His former students, now successful adults, pooled their resources to buy him a plane ticket. "You gave us everything, Sensei," Tommy said, now a gray-haired grandfather himself. "Let us give you this." The return journey was nothing like the ship voyage 58 years earlier. As the plane descended toward Osaka, Akira felt a terror he hadn't experienced in decades. What was he returning to? His village was probably gone, absorbed into the sprawling city. Everyone he had known was surely dead. He was returning not as a success, but as an old man with nothing. The weight of his broken promise pressed on him with crushing force. He took a train to what had been his village, now just another suburb of Osaka. The fishing harbor was still there, but everything else had changed. Modern buildings, paved roads, cars everywhere. He walked slowly, using a cane now, trying to find anything familiar. Finally he found it, the shrine where his mother used to pray. It was old, worn, but still standing. Beside it was a small memorial stone with names carved into it, including his mother's. Someone had been maintaining it. Who would care for a poor fisherwoman's grave for nearly 60 years? "Are you Tanaka Akira?" The voice came from behind him, in Japanese. Akira turned to see an elderly man, probably in his 80s, thin and bent with age. "Yes," Akira replied in Japanese that felt rusty after so many years speaking English. "How did you know?" The old man smiled, his eyes crinkling. "I was your neighbor. I was 10 years old when you left. I remember your mother showing everyone your letter, promising you would return rich within 2 years. For a decade she checked every ship, asking if her son had returned. She never gave up hope, even as she..." He paused, struggling with emotion. "Even as she died, I promised her I would maintain her grave, waiting for you. I thought you had died, or forgotten." The words hit Akira like a physical blow. For several moments he couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The full weight of his failure crashed down on him. "I failed her," he finally whispered. "I promised I would return rich, and I return as a poor old man with nothing. I broke my promise." The old man looked at him with confusion. Then something else. Surprise. "Nothing? Tanaka-san, do you not know?" "Know what?" Akira's voice was barely audible. The old man gestured toward the shrine. "Your mother's grave has been maintained for 60 years, yes, but not by me alone. 20 years ago, letters started arriving from America. From your students, they called themselves. They told us about you, about what you did in the camps, about how you saved people's spirits, taught them to survive with dignity. They sent money to maintain the shrine, to honor your mother's memory because you had honored them. Then more letters came. People you had helped, counseled, saved. Dozens of them. Some sent money, some sent stories. There's a whole box of them in the shrinekeeper's house." Akira's legs felt weak. He leaned heavily on his cane. "I don't understand." The old man's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Tanaka-san, your mother prayed every day at this shrine that you would return rich, but she never specified what kind of wealth she meant. You returned poor in money, yes, but rich?" He gestured broadly, encompassing everything. "You are richer than any man I have ever known. You have wealth that cannot be stolen, cannot be destroyed by war or depression or prejudice. You have the wealth of lives you changed, people you saved, wisdom you shared. Your mother wanted you to build a life worthy of honor. And you did. Just not in the way either of you imagined." The revelation hit Akira with the force of a tsunami. For 58 years he had carried the weight of a broken promise, had defined himself by his failure to accumulate money. But standing there in front of his mother's grave with letters from people whose lives he had touched, he suddenly saw it. The promise hadn't been broken. It had been transformed into something infinitely more valuable. He had promised to return rich. And he had. Just not in dollars and cents. Akira collapsed to his knees at his mother's grave. This dignified old man finally allowing himself to break, tears streaming down his weathered face. The old neighbor knelt beside him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Through his sobs, Akira whispered, "I'm sorry I took so long to understand." And in that moment, he felt something he hadn't felt in nearly 60 years. Peace. Not the peace of completion, but the peace of finally understanding what had been true all along. That his mother's prayer had been answered, that his promise had been kept, just in a language he hadn't learned to speak until this very moment. The shrine keeper, hearing the commotion, brought out the box of letters. There were hundreds of them. Akira spent the next 3 days reading them, each one a testament to a life he had touched, a moment of wisdom he had shared, a life he had helped save in that camp or afterwards. Young people who had become doctors, lawyers, teachers, business owners, not because they were rich, but because an old man had taught them that dignity and character were wealth that could never be taken away. Parents thanking him for saving their children from bitterness. Grandparents thanking him for teaching their families to survive with honor. Even Tommy had written a 10-page letter describing how Akira's words in that camp had saved him from a life of rage and emptiness. On his last day in Japan, Akira returned to the shrine one final time. He placed a small stone on his mother's grave, a tradition, and spoke to her for the first time in 58 years. "Mother, I kept my promise. I just didn't understand what you were asking me to do. You didn't want me to return with gold. You wanted me to return as someone worthy of being your son. It took me 6 decades, but I finally understand. The wealth you wanted wasn't in my pockets. It was in my character, in the lives I touched, in the wisdom I earned through suffering. I am rich, mother, richer than any emperor, and every bit of that wealth came from the lesson you taught me in your final breath, that true value isn't measured in what we take from the world, but in what we give to it." Akira returned to San Francisco 2 weeks later. He lived 4 more years, dying peacefully in 1987 at the age of 81. At his funeral, over 300 people attended. Former students, people he had counseled, children and grandchildren of those he had helped in the camps. Each one stood and told a story of how Akira had changed their life, not through money or connections, but through simple wisdom, infinite patience, and an understanding of what it meant to be truly wealthy. The service lasted for 4 hours because everyone wanted to share their story of the richest poor man they had ever known. Here's what Akira Tanaka's life teaches us, and why this story matters more today than ever. We live in a world obsessed with wealth measured in followers, dollars, square footage, and status symbols. We make promises based on these metrics, judge our success by these standards, and break ourselves trying to accumulate things that can be taken away in an instant. But Akira discovered what truly matters. That the only wealth worth accumulating is the kind that survives loss, transcends tragedy, and grows stronger through sharing. He learned that a promise to return rich could be kept in ways far more valuable than gold. That success isn't about what you own, but about who you become. And that the most profound victories are often invisible to everyone except the people whose lives you touch. His story is a reminder that sometimes our greatest failures are actually our greatest successes, just measured in a different currency. That suffering can either destroy us or forge us into something far stronger and more valuable. That true wealth is found in character, wisdom, compassion, and the legacy we leave in the hearts of others. Akira spent 60 years thinking he had failed his mother, when in reality every moment of those 60 years was fulfilling her deepest wish, that he become a man of true worth, someone who could transform suffering into wisdom and share that wisdom with others. So if you're watching this and feeling like you've failed, like your promises are broken, like you're not where you thought you'd be by now, remember Akira Tanaka. Remember that the journey to wealth might look nothing like you imagined, that success might be spelled in a language you haven't learned yet, and that sometimes the richest people are the ones who have lost everything except the one thing that truly matters, their humanity. If this story moved you, if it changed how you think about success and failure, hit that like button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment telling me what wealth means to you now after hearing Akira's story. And subscribe. Because we need more stories that remind us what's truly valuable in this world. Stories like Akira's aren't just entertainment. They're maps for how to live, how to suffer, and how to emerge from loss not just intact, but transformed into something far more precious than gold.